Good evening. Welcome to Loveworld USA News. I'm TGK Andre. First, let's take a quick look at the top stories this evening. President Trump holds Situation Room meeting on Israel-Iran conflict. U.S. strike options considered. Authorities investigate political motive in Minnesota lawmaker shooting. Trump DOJ clears way to reverse California land protections. Newsom responds. Lawmakers push to block China from buying U.S. farmland. Senate advances major cryptocurrency regulation bill. And now to the news. President Donald Trump convened a Situation Room meeting at the White House on Tuesday to evaluate U.S. response options amid escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. A senior U.S. official confirmed that potential airstrikes on Iranian targets, including nuclear sites, are under consideration. President Trump returned to Washington early from the G7 summit in Canada, citing developments in the Middle East. Before leaving, he joined a brief collective declaration opposing Iran's nuclear ambitions and supporting a ceasefire in Gaza. He also criticized Iran, demanding unconditional surrender and calling for the evacuation of Tehran. The Israeli military maintains air superiority over Iran and has reportedly destroyed 40% of Iran's missile arsenal. However, Iran continues to fire ballistic missiles at Israel in reduced salvos, according to Israeli and U.S. officials. Vice President J.D. Vance has defended the administration's position, stating that President Trump remains firm in preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Iran has enriched uranium far beyond civilian levels, Vance posted on social media, citing IAEA violations. Watch this.
President Trump cut short his trip to the G7 summit and returned from Canada for a White House meeting with his national security team.
Not having to use telephones so much because I don't believe in telephones. There's people like you listen to them. So being on the scene is much better.
The Trump administration says the U.S. is not involved in the ongoing airstrikes. Israeli military jets continue to pound targets inside of Iran. And President Trump posted on social media, "We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran." Satellite images show direct hits on Iran's uranium enrichment program in Natanz.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple.
Authorities in Minnesota are investigating the motive behind Saturday's shootings that killed former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband and wounded State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. The suspect, 57-year-old Vance Luther Bolter, is in custody and faces both federal and state charges, including murder and firearm violations. Officials have described the incident as a politically motivated assassination, though specific ideological motives remain unclear. U.S. Attorney Joseph H. Thompson stated that all victims were Democrats, but emphasized that determining Bolter's exact motivations is still premature. A manifesto found in Bolter's possession listed around 70 public figures, including pro-abortion politicians and healthcare providers. Bolter, who previously served on the state's Workforce Development Board, was described by the acquaintances as a conservative with ties to evangelical churches and support for former President Donald Trump. Law enforcement also recovered firearms and flyers related to ongoing protests, but no conclusive link has been drawn between the protests and the attack. Governor Tim Walz condemned the killings as political violence and canceled his planned appearance at a St. Paul demonstration. Federal and local officials continue their investigation as Bolter awaits court proceedings. Watch this.
Members of Congress got a briefing today and were told the suspect had notebooks with names of other lawmakers. Vance Bolter has been charged with killing a Minnesota state representative and her husband and wounding 2 others. While they did discuss specific suggestions to boost security measures, those were not made public, but we're getting a better sense of how seriously they're taking this issue.
Senator, how would you characterize the briefing that you had just now?
Sobering.
Why is that?
The threat to public officials and their families is very real and very widespread.
Is enough being done right now?
No.
Texas Senator John Cornyn said they were told that threats against public officials are likely going to go up and that resources remain a major issue.
Governor Gavin Newsom is pushing back after the Department of Justice under President Donald Trump issued a legal opinion supporting the rollback of 2 national monuments in California established during the Biden administration. The DOJ memo states that a president has the authority to revoke monument designations made by previous administrations under the Antiquities Act of 1906. The decision opens the door for the Trump administration to eliminate protections for the Chakwala and Sititla Highlands national monuments, moves that critics argue would allow for commercial development on the federally protected lands. Newsom denounced the effort, calling it petty, and accusing Trump of continuing his war on California. The Trump administration argues that the Biden-era designations hinder economic development and energy independence. The DOJ's memo specifically overrules a 1938 opinion that had previously asserted such designations could not be reversed by future presidents. In response, a White House spokesperson criticized California's energy policies, calling them harmful to residents and beneficial only to Democratic donors. The administration maintains that reopening federal lands aligns with national interests in energy and economic growth. Let's take a look.
The legal back and forth over President Trump's use of the National Guard to enforce immigration raids is escalating. A federal judge last night ordering Trump to return control of the National Guard to California's governor, ruling the deployment to Los Angeles was illegal and violated the 10th Amendment.
We push back against these authoritarian tendencies of a president that has pushed the boundaries, pushed the limit, but no longer can push this state.
More stories after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Money is the sign of shortage. Money is not the sign of blessing, it's the sign of shortage. Money is not the evidence of blessing, it is the evidence of shortage. It is the evidence of lack. I know nobody ever told you that. So you better listen to me now. I walk in absolute prosperity, so I can tell you, money is not a sign of prosperity, it's a sign of lack. It's a game that defines the classification of people. Once you are able to see beyond it and understand what God's plan is and who you are not controlled by money. Money becomes your slave. Somebody said, I wish I heard what Pastor just said in the month of May. Month of blessing, I would have applied it. You still have time. We carry all the blessings of the previous month into the new ones. That's what we do. Never let the thought of money control your attitude.
Yes, sir.
You know, there are people who become happy when they have money. And when they don't have it, you can tell. You just look at them, you can tell. You can tell they're broken down. Money's their master. They're worshiping the god of Mammon. When you are delivered from that, or when you've not been enslaved by that, you don't know when you've had money and when you've not had money, because you don't operate with those numbers. Lako rabakasaya, rabakanda lobosia. Are you still there?
Welcome back. A bipartisan group in Congress has introduced the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Improvements Act to increase oversight of foreign ownership of U.S. agricultural land with a particular focus on Chinese investment. The bill follows a Government Accountability Office report that found the current AFIDA law inadequate in tracking foreign land acquisitions. The new legislation would mandate reporting for any foreign entity holding over a 1% stake in U.S. farmland, enhance data sharing between the Department of Agriculture and the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and modernize federal tracking guidelines. As of the end of 2023, Chinese investors held more than 277,000 acres of U.S. agricultural land, part of a broader trend that has seen nearly 45 million acres of farmland acquired by foreign entities nationwide. Lawmakers say the bill aims to limit foreign influence over critical resources and bolster national security. Roughly half of all U.S. states already restrict or prohibit foreign ownership of farmland, and efforts to ban purchases near military bases have gained traction in the Senate. The U.S. has approximately 1.3 billion acres of privately held agricultural land. The U.S. Senate is moving towards final passage of the Genius Act, a bill that would establish federal oversight of stablecoins, cryptocurrencies pegged to assets like the U.S. dollar. The legislation aims to regulate the growing $250 billion stablecoin market and create safeguards for consumers in the financial system. Initially backed by both parties, the bill lost Democratic support after it was revealed that a Trump-linked crypto firm, World Liberty Financial, would benefit from a $2 billion stablecoin deal involving an Abu Dhabi-backed investor and Binance. In response, Democrats pushed for added protections, resulting in bipartisan changes, including mandatory disclosure of stablecoin holdings over $5,000 by government officials and enhanced anti-money laundering measures. Although Majority Leader John Thune reversed plans for an open amendments process to avoid tanking the bill, over 100 amendments were proposed. Critics like Senator Elizabeth Warren opposed the bill for being too weak, while GOP Senators Rand Paul and Josh Hawley objected on ideological grounds. Supporters, including Senator Kristen Gillibrand, argue the legislation brings much-needed structure to an unregulated space and counters foreign influence in U.S. markets. Despite concerns over former President Trump's business ties, Gillibrand says the bill represents a necessary step forward. Let's take a look.
The yeas are 68, the nays are 30. The bill as amended is passed.
JetBlue Airways has announced it will scale back operations and implement internal cost-cutting measures as it forecasts continued financial challenges through 2025. CEO Joanna Geraghty informed staff that the airline is unlikely to reach a break-even operating margin this fiscal year due to sluggish consumer demand and ongoing economic uncertainty. The airline plans to reduce flying capacity, particularly on lower demand travel days like Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and eliminate underperforming routes. JetBlue is also postponing refurbishment plans for some of its older A320 aircraft and will park several jets by the end of summer. Internally, the company is merging or restructuring leadership roles, trimming discretionary training programs, and tightening business travel expenses. JetBlue has not turned in annual profit since before the pandemic and continues to rely on borrowed funds to support operations. Despite these cutbacks, JetBlue says it will continue investing in areas such as frontline compensation, key hires, and its upcoming domestic first-class product currently in development. The news continues after this break. Stay
The
with
life
us.
of a soldier is not just a job, it's a calling and a sacred tradition passed down from father to son, brother to sister, and one generation to the next. At every hour of danger, our noblest citizens have answered that call. Time and again, our enemies have learned that if you dare to threaten the American people, American soldier will chase you down, crush you, and cast you into oblivion. The last sound you ever hear will be the dueling howl of Black Hawks. Thunderous boom of artillery fire. Or the ferocious roar of a U.S. Army infantry brigade. For our adversaries, there's no greater fear than the United States Army. Now it's your duty to shield the flame of freedom that was first lit 250 years ago by the heroes of Concord Bridge and Bunker Hill. Standing before you today, I am more confident than ever that in the days ahead and every generation to come, the U.S. Army will heap glory upon glory. You will protect every inch of...
Welcome back. Russia launched a large-scale missile and drone attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, overnight into Tuesday, killing at least 10 and injuring more than 100 people. Officials said 27 locations in the city were hit, including a 9-story apartment block that partially collapsed. A 62-year-old American citizen was among the dead. Authorities initially reported 15 fatalities in Kyiv, but later revised that number down. 2 others were killed in Odessa. Ukraine's interior minister reported that 440 drones and 32 missiles were launched in one of the largest attacks since the start of the full-scale war. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said more than 40 apartments were destroyed, with fears more people remain trapped under debris. Emergency crews worked throughout the day, although air raid sirens repeatedly disrupted rescue operations. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed it targeted military-industrial facilities and that all objectives were hit. Ukrainian officials said civilian, residential, and educational buildings were among those damaged. Russia also reported that 147 Ukrainian drones or downed over 9 of its regions and claimed Ukraine fired on occupied Donetsk. President Volodymyr Zelensky, attending the G7 summit in Canada, condemned the strikes and labeled them as terrorism. The UK and its allies are expected to announce further sanctions on Russia as the conflict continues without signs of diplomatic resolution. Watch this.
Volodymyr Zelensky calls them among the most horrific the capital's seen since the war began. He says Russia launched more than 440 drones and 32 missiles, striking homes, schools and key infrastructure. Further deaths were reported from strikes on Odessa, Sumy and Kherson. Russia's army says it targeted military industrial sites.
Protesters in Barcelona have marched through the city's central areas over the weekend to voice concerns about rising tourism levels and their impact on local life. Demonstrators carried signs opposing short-term rentals and cruise ship traffic, with some targeting popular tourist sites like the Sagrada Familia. Organizers said the goal was not to stop tourism, but to reduce it to a normal rate. Barcelona welcomed over 15 million visitors last year, 10 times its population. Critics argue that the demand for tourist accommodations has contributed to soaring rents, displacing long-time residents. One protester claimed that short-term rentals like Airbnb are converting former homes into tourist lodging, pushing locals out of the city center. The city government recently announced a plan to revoke 10,000 tourist rental licenses by 2028, effectively banning short-term tourist rentals. Some property owners criticized the move, arguing that other factors, including remote workers, are also contributing to rent increases. They warned that without tourism, Barcelona's economy could face significant challenges. Protests also took place in other parts of Spain, as well as Portugal and Italy. Authorities in Barcelona are continuing to evaluate long-term strategies to balance economic benefits from tourism with residents' concerns about housing affordability and urban livability. Let's take a look.
Armed with smoke bombs and water pistols, Barcelona residents on Sunday protested against excessive tourism, which they say is harming their community. Some demonstrators confronted an angry hotel staff member, kicked smoke bombs inside the hotel lobby, and covered the entrance with tape. Sunday's demonstrations were part of coordinated protests across Spain, Portugal, and Italy under the umbrella group Southern Europe Against Over-Tourism. Activists argue that uncontrolled tourism has sent housing prices soaring and has forced people out of their neighborhoods.
It affects our housing. More and more we find ourselves pushed out of our apartments so they can be turned into tourist rentals.
Local resident Eva Vilaseca joined the protests. She lives near Barcelona's landmark Parc Güell, designed by famous Catalan architect Antoni Gaudí. The beautiful gardens there attract many visitors, and Vilaseca says these days it feels like it's turned into a theme park where residents have no space.
We want an economy that brings prosperity to the city and benefits residents. That economy isn't tourism. We know it because we've been living like this for years, and all it's brought us is more precariousness, more poverty, and people being forced to leave the city. We don't want to become another Ibiza.
For a city of just 1.6 million people, Barcelona drew 26 million tourists last year. Even as tourists face an unfriendly reception, a forecast from the World Travel and Tourism Council says Spain and France are set to receive record numbers of tourists this year. And the group expects international travel spending in Europe to rise this year 11% to $838 billion, which may be influenced in part by some tourists avoiding the United States. That's according to the group's CEO, who said in a recent press briefing Canadians and Mexicans might opt against travel to the US in light of President Donald Trump.
And to end the news today, a quick recap of the headlines. President Trump holds Situation Room meeting on Israel-Iran conflict, the U.S. strike options considered. Authorities investigate political motive in Minnesota lawmaker shooting. The Trump DOJ clears way to reverse California land protections. Newsom responds. Lawmakers push to block China from buying U.S. farmland. and the Senate advances majority cryptocurrency regulation bill. And that's the news for today. Join us same time tomorrow for more news. I'm TGK Andre. Good night and God bless you.